Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third installment of On Demand with INFUSEmedia. Today's session is a gem because we're chatting about an issue that's near and dear to our hearts and to the hearts of many of our listeners like you, and because we have three terrific guests here today who I will introduce in a moment. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded 2 days before it's going to broadcast live. Of course, we're hoping to get everyone together the day of the webinar, but as you can imagine, our schedules are impossible to align. To the extent that we discuss any topics currently in the news, you'll know where we're coming from. Second, this recording will be available on demand, and we will send out the link. We'll also make sure to post on our website at infusemedia.com/insights, on YouTube, and all other available platforms. If you have any questions for the panel, please feel free to submit them via the chat window. Our teams will be monitoring questions during the broadcast and will respond to you then. Now, without further ado, here's our esteemed panel. Kim Boyle is currently head of client strategy and growth at Cantina. She has more than 2 decades of experience in strategy development, business consulting, in marketing consulting, client strategy, and many others. Most recently, founder of the Soft Group, which is a company focused on marketing strategy for some of the most coveted brands in the world. Her opening line on LinkedIn, which I love, reads, quote, "Innovation is not magic, but the application of smart, disciplined craft." Next, we have Dr. Shanita Williams. She is a TEDx speaker, coach, adjunct professor, and most recently an author of a brand new book, Feedback Mentality, the Key to Unlocking and Unleashing Your Full Potential. She currently serves as an Associate Vice President of Talent Engagement and Inclusion at SNHU. In addition to the feedback mentality, her areas of expertise include emotional intelligence, crucial conversations, and change management, among many others. In 2015, she conducted research called She Made It, where she explored the lived experiences of working mothers as students. The research became an inspiration for a company called Momploident, a nonprofit organization she founded in 2016, committed to helping working mothers excel academically. Last but certainly not least, welcome to Gillian Muessig. She is the CEO of Outlines Venture Group and a managing director of the Master Fund, a global gender lens venture capital fund based in Seattle, Washington. Gillian was a co-founder of Moz, the world's most popular provider of digital marketing software. In addition to serving on dozens of boards of directors and advisors worldwide, she had served as an advisor to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the US State Department, the German Marshals Fund, YTILI program, Swiss Contact, and other private and government entrepreneur programs. Gillian speaks globally on the financial benefits of structured equity and gender lens in investing for investors, entrepreneurs, and the communities in which they operate, as well as the impact of global trends on startup activity. With Ann Kennedy, Gillian hosts a weekly radio podcast, VC Confidential, designed to rip the lid off of opaque world of venture capital and explore emerging capitalization options to spur growth and increase sustainability. The show is available at WMR.FM, Apple Podcasts, and all other streaming services. Over more than 3 decades, Gillian has helped thousands of companies to launch, grow, pivot, and thrive. Welcome, ladies, to this webinar. And for those who are new to our webinar series, my name is Victoria Albert. I currently serve as a Vice President of Marketing for INFUSEmedia. Like Kim, I come with 20+ years of experience in all things strategy, marketing, digital, various industries, B2B, B2C. At Infuse, I'm tasked with forming and leading a growth marketing organization in the demand gen space. And specific to our topic today, I've had an interest in and helped form various women leadership forums over the years, I am honored and humbled to have all three of you with us today. All right, well, the reason we're speaking today is because we're seeing some alarming trends, especially trends that have pivoted this year in 2020, and I'm sure will be with us for the next decade or more. Namely, the recession of 2020 has been dubbed a she-cession by McKinsey and others. And that's because the recession following the 2008 financial crisis affected mostly men and was dubbed a man-cession because so many who were laid off were in financial sector, in construction and manufacturing. This time is different. In May, the unemployment rate for women climbed to 15.5%, while the rate for men increased to 13%, according to BLS. Women of color were especially hard hit by the job losses, with the April unemployment rate reaching an unheard of 16.4% for Black women and 20.2% for Hispanic women. So obviously, we've reached an emergency for the corporate world. More than 1 out of 4 women are contemplating that they may not return to the workforce for obvious reasons, which was really unthinkable just 6 months ago. In the United States, women also carry a disproportionate responsibility for childcare, as we all know, which could make the return into the workforce difficult, if not impossible. Companies are losing women on their leadership boards and really losing future women leaders and unwinding years, if not decades, of painstaking progress towards gender diversity and equality. And so we all know that businesses will suffer. In fact, latest research shows that company profits and share performance can be close to 15 to 50% higher when women are well represented at the top. So with that as a backdrop, let's really unwind what all of this means to businesses and what we as women leaders can do to make this all go away, right? To reinforce women leadership and diversity at the very top and make sure that there's a continuity in business leadership. I have a few questions for each of you, but please chime in. We want to hear your voices. We want to make them heard. So my first question is for Gillian. Is there more or less opportunity for women in today's business environment?
In the business environment, there is more opportunity than there was maybe 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. But in the economic and social environment, the amount of burden that the females must carry is so exorbitant that it is unlikely that they can take advantage of it. And that's what you were talking about. This is a recession in which the inequities of labor between the genders is really highlighted. And with women having to raise the children and teach them and manage the households, it is highly unlikely that we will find a net sum improvement in the number of women who feel that they have the ability to get back to work as well. Right. So while opportunity exists, it doesn't mean you can take advantage of it.
I have my very next question for Dr. Williams. Have you seen any changes in women pursuing higher education and how that impacts broader employment trends?
So when it comes to higher education and really the impact of the pandemic, we've definitely seen it across the board. When we look at the impacts of our enrollment rates, we're seeing at the undergraduate level more than a 4% decrease in enrollments across the board in higher education, which is important to note. But it's really interesting when you really disaggregate that data and think about that, not just as an aggregate, but by the type of institution. What we're finding is when you look at public versus private four-year institutions, their enrollment has actually only slightly decreased by 1.4% or 2%, which is really interesting to think about. But where we've seen the largest drop, according to Inside Higher Ed, is really in the community college level. They've had a significant drop in enrollments by 9%. And when you think about the groups have been most impacted, it's actually been our first year students. We're actually seeing a decline in individuals pursuing education for their first year. Now, when we disaggregate the community college information, we also find that it is men, not women, who are actually declining in enrollments. White men have seen a decline in enrollments. Black men have seen a decline in enrollments. And for Black men, it's actually been twice that of Black women. So when we think about kind of the historical trends, women have historically enrolled at higher numbers than men. And when we look at that data from the community college level, it is still, women are still trending at higher levels. But it's actually also very interesting to look at the for-profit sector, because it's actually a different story when we think about what those enrollment rates look like. While overall, institutions have been decreasing in their enrollments, the for-profit sector has actually seen an increase in enrollments by 3%, which is really interesting when you think about the type of institutions. And for those who had an online modality pre-pandemic, they've actually seen an increase in their enrollments at the undergraduate level by 6.8% and at the grad level by 7%. So when we think about women during this time in the pursuit of education, what we're finding overall is that, people are really pausing and figuring out what is the next best step for themselves. We know that women are juggling multiple hats, right? Not only are you, managing your job and juggling those responsibilities, the impact of COVID-19 has brought in the teaching aspect. We're teaching our children as well as pursuing our own education, as well as maintaining the responsibilities of the household. So I think women are now pausing at this point and trying to assess for themselves, what is the next best step for me? Given my modality, given my responsibilities, what is the next best thing for me today and for my future? And when you look at that, you see a few different options. There's some people who have already been enrolled and they're continuing on that vein. They're continuing to pursue it, given their responsibilities, they can maintain it. There are some people who have decided, now might be a good time to pause, right? Given all of the things that are going on, pause, reflect, and figure out what is the next step after this. But then you also have a population of people who are saying, I think now's the time. So we're seeing people who are also starting education for the very first time during this pandemic as well. So a variety of experiences, but definitely the pandemic has impacted higher education overall.
Kim, as a female leader heading up a large organization and accountable for serious growth metrics,
yes,
a job that has, let's face it, been predominantly male dominated, are you seeing this corporate world emergency having an impact on sales and marketing overall?
Yes, absolutely. I think that as a sales professional, the biggest challenge that we have right now is that we're not able to physically meet prospects and physically meet our existing clients. And so, these large conferences and events where we were able to have that in-person meeting, it's been wiped out for our, obviously our profession. What women need to do though, and men, not just women, but primarily it's understanding how you get out of that box. Sales professionals have been able to, have that type of networking opportunity, whether it's local or, at a conference. And I think it's identifying how you really dig deep within your network and identifying how you approach new prospects and what's that conversation. How is it that you mutually explore, challenges, priorities, and opportunities? And so it's getting comfortable being pushed into, different boxes per se. And I think that's been the biggest eye-opener for any sales professional, particularly women in the engineering and development space. It is male dominated. A lot of the folks that we speak to that are chief technology officers, chief information officers, they're male. And you have to understand or take the time to understand what are the priorities, what are the challenges that these individuals and that these companies are facing, and take the approach of that mutual exploration and being empathetic to the organization's situation and how you can be helpful versus I've got my numbers that I have to reach or that I have to make sure that I, obtain, and look at how do you add value to an organization, not just your own.
Now, Gillian, I know that as a co-founder of Moz, you probably have a lot to say in that as well. My next question is for you. How does this recession compare with that of 2008 and past recessions? And what can you offer on how women's careers were impacted at that time versus now?
Every 10 years or so, the world goes to hell in a handbasket. This is nothing new, right? So just the last three would include the dot-com bust of 2001, the real estate and mortgage banking crisis of 2008-9, and then again, in about another 10 years, we ended up with a health crisis and so on. So it's nothing new, and we ride through these waves on a regular basis. How should I say, those who are challenged already are hardest hit no matter when and no matter where, right? The starvation that will result from this pandemic will be far worse than the deaths of COVID-19, right? The fact that women are saddled with inequities around the world, not just here in the States, in terms of the amount of unpaid labor they perform on a daily basis, right, also puts them at a disadvantage. And that's across the board. But in particular, Black families, for example, in the United States, where many women are head of household, right? They see their savings wiped out. They see their capital wealth wiped out. In 2009, for example, 51% of the capital wealth of African-American families in the United States was wiped out. Right? If we continue on the trends we have today, the average capital wealth of an African-American family in the United States by 2051 will be zero. It's staggering differences between Caucasian families and African-American families. And again, I don't have the hard numbers around Latin families, families that are, if you will, different in any way, LGBTQ, immigrant families from anywhere in the world, all of those things, right? I don't have the hard numbers on them, but as I look into them every single time, when you are not at the top of the heap, you, unreasonably carry the weight of the impact of these negative events. Changing that has to do with money. It all boils down to that, right? I see, for example, there are so many, corporations, funds, schools, etc., that talk about providing education, mentorship, advisory services, incubators, accelerators, and so on from my world of startup, right? Women don't need any of that. They are so qualified. They need capital. They need investment. They need the money, right? It's not that we don't need any of these things. We just don't need more of it, for heaven's sake, right? And women, I think, continue. I'm not sure, but maybe Shanita has these numbers. Women continue to get degrees at greater rates than men across the board, across all ethnicities, across all age groups here in the United States. To no avail. Right? It's not that they cannot get to a job, do the job, and progress ahead. It's that everything else they must carry stops that from happening. So we need to look at it in a much more broad way, if you will. The good news might be that these women are leaving their businesses, right? They're leaving the corporate jobs and they are founding startups. And again, women are founding far more startups than ever before. I find that very exciting. It's again a very testosterone heavy world, in the world of venture capital. And how we fund companies in venture capital is fraught with problems as well. Conventional venture capital numbers are not good. 80% of any venture funded company, conventionally venture funded company, will die in 5 years. And yet we congratulate each other as we get funded, right? Because our survivability rate has gone down to 20%. Right? 16% more will not exit, which means they don't have a sale or an IPO, right? An initial public offering. And if they don't do that, they return nothing to their funds. Not so good for the investors either, right? Only 4% will carry the funds. They're after the unicorns, the ones we read about in the papers. Right? So you understand why they must focus on the unicorns. But to waste 96%, right, of these companies, or at least the 80%, the others will continue to work but not exit, right? But to waste 80% of the world's finest companies is outrageous. These are not the butchers and the bakers and the candlestick makers. These are people solving the most pressing problems on the planet. They are part of that tiny, tiny sliver of 1% that will ever get venture capital, and yet we throw them away. So as we look at how the women are forming their companies, we find far more women are forming companies that are not suitable for conventional venture capital. And we hear that complaint among these venture capitalists, right? They said, well, we can't find the deal flow. And I say, nonsense, the deal flow is there. As I look at those numbers, 80% will die, 16% will not return anything to the fund, 4% carry an entire fund. I say, did venture capitalists make a mistake on 96% of their investment decisions? And people chuckle and they go, oh, I've never really thought about it that way. How else would you think about it? It's their job to return capital to the fund. I don't think they made a mistake on 96% of their investment decisions. I think they used the wrong funding model. Coming up with ways in which we can fund the right founder with the right funding model establishes a road to success that has not been available before. As we look, for example, at the built environment of the planet, almost all of it was designed and constructed by able-bodied, strong males between 18 and 30 years old. It was designed for and by them. It's not bad, it's an extraordinary world, but we need to balance it. In the same way, I'm saying I don't want to have the $156 billion invested in men. I want to double it. We need to balance what's going on with additional capital. So in my world, the capital must come from different hands and go to different hands. That's the difference between perhaps this pandemic, which is the health crisis, and the crises that came before. The crisis that came before, we cataloged what happened, right? And again, those with the least paid the heaviest price. With this one, there's a path forward. That's exciting, because I think we have turned a corner on a number of conversations, and that Pandora's box will not be closed again.
So we all know that the recovery plan is absolutely key for this recession and every recession, and that plotting a way forward is vital, especially for younger women and younger leaders. We know there are enormous opportunities for individuals that lie ahead. We know that reskilling, upskilling, online learning, they're all critical. Dr. Williams spoke a little bit about that a few minutes ago, and you will more in the coming few minutes. And in fact, according to the OpenU, 68% of companies are confident in their post-economic recession recovery and have invested in training during the lockdowns, which is amazing. And then finally, we know that there are opportunities for businesses. Stagnation and apathy are the biggest killers of business in 2020. If there's anything, the year has given us a chance to really step back and plan our future. And rather than look at this recession as a negative on business, we all see it as an opportunity for every business to step back, take stock of what works, what doesn't work, and how the businesses should look towards down the road. And so I'll start with the series of questions. Let's talk about opportunities to build a better future. A question for Dr. Williams. What can we learn from employee engagement trends that will build a better future?
Absolutely. I think some of the things we've noticed as of late, we know that as a nation, our engagement scores were actually about 34% in the last 2 years, which is pretty low, but that's where we've been hovering for years. 34% of our population reports and identifies as actively engaged in the workplace. The interesting thing we've noticed, given our current state, it's actually increased by 4%. So since the year 2000, we are at a historic high for employee engagement, which is really, really interesting to think about. How is it that our engagement is so high when there's so much going on, right, in the world? And so I think we can learn from that. There's a few things when you look at Gallup, they highlight, of course, we know unemployment may be influencing that number. But also we're finding that the organization's response to this scenario is actually what's helping kind of drive those engagement scores. Employees are reporting, like 77% of employees are reporting that their employer's response and plans and communication is helping people take that information to plan their lives and to think about their next steps. And that's helping people have the confidence as they plan their futures and their next steps. So communication we always knew was important, but in times of stress, in times of reorganizing and thinking through, communication and transparency is so critical to building trust and that confidence. I think one of the things that the engagement data also revealed, though, is that why our engagement scores are going up, mental health and mental wellness are at an all-time low. And so for the first time, I feel like I'm talking to organizations who are really leaning into this. Before, mental health was separate, wasn't talked about as much. You have maybe an EAP program, but today, you know, people are talking about it in the workplace. People are having conversations and are well aware of the burnout and the stress that comes with juggling so many responsibilities. And we can no longer leave it at the door. This is a conversation that is happening in the workplace. And as an organization, as we look to the future, organizations are thinking about the whole experience of the individual, not just your work self, the one who comes and does the work, but the whole person who comes to that conversation each and every day. Our social and our emotional health is a big part of that. So I think organizations are now thinking about leaning into resources and how they can be sure to make sure as people are juggling multiple responsibilities that they have the resources and the tools and the support to help navigate that, which is so, so critical. And the last thing we've pulled from some of the engagement data from Gallup, one thing that went really, really high was respect to resources and equipment. So people are reporting at highs that I have the equipment, the right equipment to do my job. And we know that the majority of people are working remotely. You know, more than 2/3 of employees are working remotely, and having the tools to do your job is so critical. And so employers responding to that and being in tune with that is critical. But we realized that the employee experience today has become even more of a focus than ever before. I think some organizations have been focused on the CX, right? Customer experience. But people are turning inward and really looking at the employee experience in a completely different way. Before it was like a byproduct of the employee experience, but now we're really leaning in and understanding that that experience that our employees are having is critical. And when you look at engagement, engagement is a predictor of productivity, profit, retention, and yes, the customer experience. And so we want to make sure that as we look to the future, that we don't negate what we've been doing. I think a lot of organizations have been doing very, very well as of late, is listening to the employee experience, leaning in and creating channels for people to share how they're navigating this new normal. Organizations can thrive if we just simply listen, because the reality is we're all figuring this out for the first time. But by hearing the lived experiences of those who are going through it, that insight is rich and I think empowering for an organization to leverage to figure out how we can design and use those insights to create the best engaged and inclusive culture in the future.
Gillian, if you don't mind, let me pose the next question to you. And I think we can build on this notion that Dr. Williams just painted. So how do we use this as an opportunity to repair the long-standing inequity in the workplace?
What I have, when you're a hammer, everything is a nail. In my world, it's the world of venture capital now. And before that, it was early stage startup technology companies in particular. So I had a similar experience to Kim's in that both of us were executors, not wizards, right? The wizard is the idea person, usually the technologist. The executor executes on the ideas of wizards and builds companies around them. So that's what we do for a living. As we look at those things, the question is, what's the missing factor? And it always boils down to the money. When women get 2% of venture capital, you're not going to get a whole lot of unicorns that are founded by women. When women have more challenges to capital wealth, they don't have the resources to enable them to work and to engage in the workforce deeply, right? They are distracted. I raised 3 children under my desk. Shanita's doing it right now. Kim has done similar things over time and has had to give the care of the children to run around the world, to pretend that this doesn't exist. I mean, on and on and on, right? So acknowledgement is the first piece. The acknowledgement that the care of the young, the elderly, and the infirm at any age falls to women's shoulders. We do not like this equation. We just know that it is so, right? So how are we going to deal with that? Do we want to keep it that way? Or do we want to do something different? For a reasonably short period of time, especially in the United States, we kind of farmed that work out. Our children were in daycare and so on, and the schools, etc., right? And countries such as, I don't know, Russia and behind the Iron Curtain in general would look at us and say, you're crazy. Why would you do that if you don't have to? Because those women were forced to send their children to collective education, right? So there is this balance. What do we want to do is the first question. And without sufficient capital, women cannot make those decisions, right? You cannot give away what you don't have. You cannot leverage what you don't have. You cannot impact your own life if you don't have sufficient capital to make that decision, which is why Kim said, I went not only to my attorney to figure out if what I was doing was reasonable and so on, but I went to my financial advisor. Can I do this, right? When you make $8 an hour, it doesn't matter. When you make $15 an hour, it doesn't matter. So in order to make sure that we have a path forward, right, as so many women are beginning their own companies, they have the opportunity to build better equity in those companies, right? That's number one. The money must come from different hands and go to different hands. It is hubris to think that I, as a fund manager, could invest in sub-Saharan Africa from Seattle, Washington. I don't know if the problem you bring me is real or rubbish, or whether the solution is real or rubbish, or whether the thing that you've invented can make the trip across wherever it is to get to the place it must be, or whether the government will permit it to go through wherever the place must be, or whether people will adopt it and use it, or whether it will have some god-awful effect on the ground that I don't know about. I have to trust that my colleagues will do it. And when I have a trusted colleague, I can follow. I can't lead that deal. The killer piece is to develop those trusted relationships across borders, across the usual silos of age, ethnicity, race, creed, all of those things, right? In order to find that you can follow. When we have women building companies, it again is hubris for us to think that a small sliver of the human genome can invest in anything, right? Stop yelling at those tall white males in Silicon Valley who invest in tall, white, youthful males, able-bodied from Harvard or Stanford, just 2 universities in the entire world, right? With baritone voices. And everything, including the baritone voices, points off if you don't have it, right? But stop shouting at them, do better, do better. They're doing what they do. If you want the women funded, We must develop women funders. And that is the beginning of the piece. As the aging population of the world increases, now almost 1/3 will be an aging piece of that population, right? The women are inheriting capital wealth. They are also establishing their own capital wealth in significant numbers, right, in the late 20th and earliest 21st century. So they've either built their own capital wealth, they're inheriting it from spouses, or they're inheriting it from the previous generation. With that capital, those women can become investors in the next generation. And again, if they lead unabashedly women funding women, they are far more likely to understand the problem. I use this example constantly. There's a company called the Joy Lux Company. It is solving pelvic floor collapse. Every woman, 80% or more of every woman who has had even one child will experience pelvic floor collapse in her lifetime, because we no longer agree to die at 40. If we did, all would be well. But since we don't, something must be done about it, right? Now, if you are doing that, right, imagine her walking in to a room full of 6 to 8 guys in black t-shirts, sport coats, and blue jeans, right? All of them Caucasian, 50 to 65, right? Hetero males, and start explaining what you're looking at. What she has is a device that looks like a fancy dildo. Good luck. And they're all sitting around going, well, my wife doesn't and your wife does. She's not talking to you about it. She's not talking to her friends about it. She doesn't talk to her physician about it. Most of the time, she doesn't know what the hell's happening until it's too late. But if you'd like to know the size of the market, take a look at, for example, the 6 o'clock news on the old-fashioned TVs, right? Kimberly Clark is cleaning up, right? It's massive, but it doesn't get funded. What does get funded is an app on your cell phone that will tell you when you can get discounts on your golf tee times, right? That one will get funded because they get it. You do exactly the same thing, walk into a group of women, they're going to get it in 5 seconds or less, right? We must focus on what we can do. It takes, if you will, the money must come from different hands and go to different hands. That's the path forward. And it isn't only about the new startups. We need government, for example, to come in where it must. The state of California has finally, after Germany and several other countries have done it, right, said that they will mandate the number of women who must be on boards of directors of public companies. High time every other state in the union does the same, right? I don't know why we left it to the states. I don't know why the United States hasn't insisted on it, right? But those are the kinds of differences that can make a difference across a large, large group of people, right? When you talked about the increase in value of a corporation when women are at the helm, right? I've got numbers that will show that over more than a quarter of a century in the private sector, when we have women-led companies, right? We talked about the 2% they get, that's kind of at the Series A stage. It's a priced round, okay? They raise 44% of the capital that their male colleagues will raise. That's a 66% less dilution as an investor, right? Every time your stock is diluted, you get less at the end, okay? So that becomes interesting. The first one, that 2%, nobody's vying for the great deals as an investor. Number two, 44% less, of the capital means 66% less dilution. They exit 1 to 2 years sooner. That means my capital is held, if you will, tied up 1 to 2 years less than average. And when they exit, they get an average of 35% higher ROI to investors. This is not a rounding figure. You would think that the money would follow the money, and yet it does not. And that's because, if you will, vestigial behavior, anthropological behavior, right? If a humanoid baby cozies up to a saber-toothed tiger, it doesn't last long. It must cozy up to its own kind for survival, right? We are comfortable as humans with humans who are like ourselves. But it isn't just humans. It's all mammals and birds and fish. And even the plants will grow in clusters among themselves. If this behavior is really about carbon-based life form, don't think you're going to change it, right? It is for the survival of whatever that species is. Therefore, we have to deal with it. And to deal with it, the money must come from different hands to different hands, right? It must be legislated when it has to be that way in order to jumpstart what has to happen. Those are the paths forward. Put the women in places of power, provide opportunities for capital wealth. And as RGB would say, right, Ruth Bader Ginsburg would have said, we don't want special treatment. We would like you to take your boot off our necks.
I'm stricken by what you just, by what you said in the beginning of the talk, Gillian, and that's, are we going to sit back and accept that 96% of our investments are failing? Or are we doing 1 to 2 year earlier exits, 35% more, right, when they exit? And so with that,
right, that's just unconventional venture capital.
That's right, that's right.
I advocate, actually, for being a venture capitalist, I'm pretty down on venture capital, right? But what
That's
I
right.
advocate is things like structured returns or a structured equity model, which is what we do at the Masters Fund. It means that it looks like conventional equity. I'm going to hand you cash, you're going to hand me stock. But we make an agreement that says, oh, I'm going to buy the stock for $1, you're going to buy it back for $3 a pop. We have already preset the multiple, much less than the minimum 10x that the VCs, that, you know, conventional VCs look for, but it's expensive capital. Can the company do it? Can we do that without killing the company? Right? Once you've gotten that redeemed stock, right? We call it redeemable preferred stock. Once they have redeemed the stock, which means buy it back, there's nobody else on the cap table. The company now owns its stock. The founders own the stock, right? We have not diluted them to nothing. Right? This makes all kinds of sense. It's good for the investors too. They have a standard redeemed value to their stock, right? They get it back sooner. They don't have to wait for a sale or an IPO, which rarely happens, as we know, right? All kinds of things. It's better for investors. It's better for the entrepreneurs, and it's better for the communities in which they function because the companies don't die at 80% a shot, right? That's the difference. So we're looking at different funding models. Dividend models look very much like the public models. Again, I purchased the stock and, you know, you've got the cash, I've got the stock, but rather than just waiting for an exit, right, this is something that can go on to your grandchildren's grandchildren, right? The founders take a reasonable kind of low but commensurate salary. They don't want to take salary anyway. It's the highest costly, the most costly way that you will ever take in capital in your life, right? You pay the highest taxes on those things, right? So they take a little bit of a salary and then they declare a dividend when the company makes money. As the largest stockholder, they get that capital, right? That is, if you will, their salary, and so do their investors. They share it with investors. It can go on forever, or you can write into that agreement that after a certain number of years, the company has the right to buy back that stock. There are so many ways to do it. What I'm saying is, don't take a hatchet to this, take a scalpel. And again, I find it's the women in venture capital who are burgeoning now, and I'm super excited about that, right? Who are doing that scalpel job, who are designing these models. There are so many ways to capitalize a company. Don't think, I must raise equity. Think, how do I capitalize this company? You don't use one piece of IT, you have an IT stack. Now you have a capitalization stack.
So with that, this is beautiful because we're really now talking about how do women change the model going forward, whatever that model is that we're working on. And so I'm going to ask a sort of a two-headed question, first to Kim and then to Dr. Williams. And the question is going to be, in your opinion, what is the future of women in the workforce, women in leadership, women in education, women in fill in your own blank? How do businesses recover with that future? And then the second part of that question will be, how do we keep female leadership in the workforce? Kim.
Well, you know, to that first question, I think quite often we women wait to get called upon. And I think we need to raise our hands. And if we want to impact our own future, as well as the future of women in the organization, you have to raise your hand. And you have to be that change maker. You have to want to be that, because a lot of women will hold back and they want to see how things go. So I think one, you have to raise your hand and you have to want to create the change that you want to see happen.
Dr. Williams, if you can elaborate on that, in addition to how do we keep female leadership in the workforce?
Well, yeah, I'll piggyback off of Kim. I mean, I agree. I think some of the things we see in from a human resource standpoint, you see typically there have been studies that have shown that women will wait until they meet all of the criteria of a job description before they apply, whereas a male can meet just a few and will put their name in the hat. So to Kim's point, I think it's important that we, for me, I think I carry this idea of perfectionism, like I have to meet everything and I have to meet my own standard before I put my name in the hat. And sometimes I realize that I could be, you know, counting myself out before I even give myself a chance. So I think to Kim's point, kind of stepping out, you know, a little bit of that risk and being able to say, hey, I'm going to put my name out there, even if I don't meet all of the criteria for leadership or whatever that's there. Because I think we limit ourselves in that space. But I also think it's an opportunity, I think from an organizational standpoint, to just pause and examine our practices and policies. You know, try to examine your current processes, and do you have language, language that you have in your postings or practices that deter different groups, not just women, but different groups from pursuing social mobility within your organization. And I think with, combining, looking and examining your practices and trying to examine for equity, I think that's a first step. But I also think, having advocates, sponsors, and mentors are critical for people who are willing to use their own social capital to continue to build the pipeline and to identify talent, look at potential, and be able to create space and pathways for people to come through the ranks if they don't have either the confidence or meet the criteria, being able to kind of create a funnel through mentorship programs, protege programs that allow people that opportunity to explore and have these conversations about social mobility, negotiating salary, all the things that can sometimes be really difficult to do unless you have someone in the organization who knows how to navigate the political climate and understand the nuances and the social nuances of that, and being willing to kind of put themselves out there to help women in the organization. So I think mentorship is so critical. I also think community is important as well. Do you have, I think, Kim, you mentioned that you have like employee resource groups or ways where women can come together. Do we have a women's leadership group or affinity groups where people can find one another and build each other up and actually have spaces to develop skills and practice, amongst yourselves, as well as have people who are experts in maybe industries that you're interested in breaking through, so that you can learn and start building networks that I think are so critical to being able to really learn, but also find pathways through the organization. So I think between mentorship, networking, finding communities, and organizations examining their current policies and practices, you can start to create opportunities to retain your top talent. Because I think with a blind eye to that, we miss amazing women, current leaders who just have not been seen. I think visibility is a big part where, being able to create visibility at higher levels for people who just haven't had the opportunity based on either their role, geography, or what have you, to be seen in a different light. So I think all of those things are critical to making sure we retain and recruit and maintain our women in leadership.
So first question for Dr. Williams, let's continue with what you just said. In today's climate, given everything you said about productivity and engagement trends and reskilling, right? Is this truly an opportunity to reskill and upskill? And how do women get there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think COVID has exposed and really changed our lives, professionally and personally. And it's challenged us to think about the way we do work today, and has challenged and created opportunities for us to rethink how we do things, specifically in a distributed way as well. I know tons of people who are trying to rethink, how do I now do my job from here? I heard earlier Kim talk about, how do I collaborate? How do we do how do I network? How do I reach business doing my same job with a new kind of environment when I'm no longer co-located? So I think, yes, this is an opportunity to reskill and upskill. And when I look at McKinsey's research, they had four specific skills that we can really lean into as we think about coming out of COVID and the opportunities that are before us. First is really about building our digital literacy, right? So getting really comfortable and confident with technology, because when we think about the future of work and everyone being distributed in some format, everyone not necessarily being co-located all the time anymore, being able to communicate through technology and have the ability to stay in touch with the ecosystem that which is no longer right in front of you is going to be critical. And so taking an opportunity, maybe it's something that you're a little good at, you might be able to lean into that more as we come out of this. If you haven't had an opportunity to exercise that because of the job or the nature of the role you had, this is an opportunity for you to actually upskill at this time. McKinsey also talked about the importance of some social emotional skills like collaboration. How do you collaborate when you're no longer co-located? What does that look like when you are in different time zones? Really challenging you to think differently about how you approach collaboration when you can't just pop over the cube and say hello, or if you have new technology that you're going to be using to do that collaboration. And the other skill that McKinsey really highlighted as being important is innovation, creativity. Today, again, as I mentioned, we're rethinking how we're doing things. Organizations are trying to reimagine or think about how to adjust to the current environment. So leaning into your problem-solving skills, critical thinking, and innovation, perhaps you didn't have to do that before. Those are definitely skills coming out of this that you can have an opportunity to lean in a little bit more and really hone so that you are prepared to navigate whatever is to come. So those are just a few skills to think about as we come out of COVID.
So Gillian, those are enormous opportunities that Dr. Williams just painted. In your tremendous experience, how can women use all of these as opportunities for greater leverage in the job market?
So I think perhaps my specialty is, what do you do when you leave that job market?
Let's talk about that.
Right. If you've been thinking about it, now is a really good time to do so. You no longer have to go, if you will, just to, only men, only conventional VC, those sorts of things. The opportunity to build a company that you've been thinking of has never been greater, right? I mean, we've outlined all of the problems and all of the issues, yes, but still things have never been as good as they are, as well as they're really, we've got a long way to go, right? We get both of those things, right? Nevertheless, if you're going to consider leaving the job market, now is a good time to formulate that company. Now is a good time to take stock of whether or not you can get a bootstrap, if you will, through the first piece. Your first question around capitalization of your company is, what can I sell today to build what I must tomorrow? Generally, it's around consulting services. Kim and I both built consulting companies. Then I moved mine to product. Kim went and joined another firm, right? Those kinds of things are possible. So things that have a low financial barrier to entry provide opportunities for women to leverage the skills they know they've got, but have never been able to sell individually. And now there is a formula for capitalizing your company as it grows over time. You do not need to build $1 billion company to make one that's highly successful. I find that many women are looking at building reasonable sized companies. We're talking somewhere between 1 and 10 for small companies, 10 to 20 million or even 100 million, right? Those are not unicorn sized companies, which are defined as being $1 billion, right? But they want to build one of those and they say, I don't have to run it forever. I can go put a CEO in place and let it go. It will throw capital off to me and I'll go use that capital to go build my next one. They are building a portfolio of companies of their own. I see women thinking this way far more often than I see men thinking this way. And perhaps it's because we have that experience, if you will, of, I don't know, it isn't just one child. We have a suite of children, right? It isn't just one thing we do. We have many things that we do across our daily lives. We can now leverage that capacity and that knowledge to go build it in business as well. So if you're going to leap, there are more women funding than ever before. There are more funding opportunities than ever before. And there are more pathways to finding your group of women. Right here in Seattle, for example, we have the Female Founders Alliance, right? And that's now nationwide. We have the Alliance of Angels. We have, again, groups where people can find their colleagues, learn from each other, as well as support each other emotionally when it's time to go, you know, scream and shout. But you can find the path forward. You don't need all the answers. Collectively, the founders will share it with you.
Hopefully you just inspired a whole new swath of female leaders who are ready to go out there and form their own businesses and be the founders. That's right. That's a perfect place for us to end. I want to thank all three of you for being with us today. Loved having you on this installment. You know, you come with such wealth of experiences with such diverse backgrounds, yet come together so beautifully. And that, I think, is the makeup of women in leadership. Thank you for your wisdom. Now, where can our listeners find you, and how can they get in touch with you and or network with you? Gillian, let's start with you.
You can find me at Gillian at masters.vc. It's G as in golf, ILLIAN as in Nancy, at masters.vc.
Thank you. Dr. Williams, where can our listeners find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Dr. Shanita Williams, or you can email me directly at shanitawilliams09@att.net.
Beautiful. And
you
Kim?
can find me on LinkedIn at Kim Boyle, or you can email me at kim.boyle@cantina.co.
Thank you all so much. Until next time.